Political ideologies are coherent sets of beliefs about how society should be organized and governed. They offer a framework for understanding the world, diagnosing its problems, and proposing solutions. Far from being monolithic, each ideology possesses a spectrum of internal variations and interpretations, often shaped by historical context, cultural nuances, and individual proponents. Understanding these diverse frameworks is crucial for navigating political discourse and appreciating the various visions for a just and prosperous society. At the heart of any political ideology lies a particular conception of human nature, the role of the state, and the ideal relationship between the individual and society. These fundamental assumptions drive their policy prescriptions and their stance on issues ranging from economic organization to social justice. While new ideologies emerge and old ones adapt, a few foundational traditions have shaped modern political thought, often serving as benchmarks against which newer ideas are measured. Liberalism, the pursuit of liberty and individual rights. Emerging from the Enlightenment in the 17th and 18th centuries, liberalism is perhaps the most dominant political ideology in the Western world. Its core tenet is the paramount importance of individual liberty and rights. Liberals believe that individuals are rational beings capable of making their own choices, and thus, society should be structured to maximize individual freedom. Early liberals like John Locke emphasized natural rights, life, liberty, and property, and argued for limited government, constitutionalism, and the rule of law to protect these rights from state encroachment. Classical liberalism, prevalent in the 18th and 19th centuries, strongly advocated for free markets, minimal state intervention in the economy, laissez-faire, and individual responsibility. Thinkers such as Adam Smith championed free trade and competition, believing they would lead to overall societal prosperity. They were wary of state power, viewing it as a potential threat to individual autonomy. This strain of liberalism champions negative liberty, freedom from interference. However, as industrialization progressed and social inequalities became more apparent, a new form of liberalism, known as social or modern liberalism, began to take shape in the late 19th and 20th centuries. Figures like T.H. Green and John Maynard Keynes argued that true liberty could not exist without certain social and economic conditions. They proposed that the state had a positive role to play in ensuring equality of opportunity, providing social welfare, regulating the economy, and mitigating the harshest effects of capitalism. This shift introduced the concept of positive liberty, freedom to achieve one's potential, often requiring state support. Despite their differences, both classical and modern liberals share a commitment to individual rights, democracy, and the rule of law. Conservatism, tradition, order, and gradual change. Conservatism, in its modern form, largely arose in response to the radical changes brought about by the French Revolution and the Enlightenment's emphasis on abstract reason. Unlike liberalism, which often looks forward, conservatism tends to look backward, valuing tradition, established institutions, and gradual change over revolutionary upheaval. Edmund Burke, considered a father of modern conservatism, critiqued the French Revolution's abstract ideals, arguing for the wisdom of accumulated experience, prescriptive rights, and the organic nature of society. Conservatives generally believe that society is a complex, delicate organism that should not be tinkered with lightly. They emphasize the importance of order, stability, and authority, often drawing on traditional institutions like the family, religion, and the state as pillars of social cohesion. Human nature, from a conservative perspective, is often seen as imperfect and fallible, making strong social structures and moral frameworks necessary to prevent chaos. Different strands of conservatism exist. Paternalistic conservatism, often associated with figures like Benjamin Disraeli, acknowledges social obligations, and the need for the state to provide some welfare to maintain social order. Libertarian conservatism, on the other hand, shares classical liberalism's emphasis on limited government and free markets, but grounds these beliefs in a conservative respect for property rights and individual responsibility, rather than a broad commitment to social liberty. Neo-conservatism, emerging in the mid-20th century, often advocates for a strong national defense, assertive foreign policy, and a return to traditional values, sometimes combining these with free market economics. Despite their variations, conservatives share a common thread: a skepticism towards radical change, a reverence for established customs, and a belief in the importance of authority and order for a stable society. Socialism, equality, community, and collective ownership. Socialism arose in the 19th century as a critique of the social and economic inequalities generated by industrial capitalism. At its core, socialism champions equality, social justice, and collective ownership or control of the means of production. Socialists believe that the competitive nature of capitalism inherently leads to exploitation, alienation, and vast disparities in wealth and power. They envision a society where resources are distributed more equitably and where the community's needs take precedence over individual profit. Early forms of socialism, often called Utopian socialism, proposed ideal communities based on cooperation and shared resources, as seen in the ideas of Robert Owen and Charles Fourier. However, it was Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels who developed the most influential and systematic theory of socialism, known as scientific socialism or Marxism. Marx argued that history is driven by class struggle, and that capitalism would inevitably be overthrown by a proletarian working-class revolution, leading to a classless communist society. In this vision, the state, as an instrument of the ruling class, would eventually wither away. Democratic socialism, a distinct strand, advocates for achieving socialist goals through democratic means, working within existing parliamentary systems. Unlike revolutionary Marxists, democratic socialists generally reject violent revolution and the establishment of a one-party state. They aim to gradually transform capitalism through policies such as nationalization of key industries, comprehensive welfare states, progressive taxation, and strong labor protections. They seek to balance individual liberties with social equality, believing that true freedom is enhanced by a more equitable distribution of wealth and power. Many European social democratic parties fall into this category. Revolutionary socialism, by contrast, maintains that fundamental societal change can only come through a revolutionary overthrow of the existing capitalist system. This includes various forms of communism and anarchism that seek radical transformations. While the collapse of the Soviet Union impacted the perception of state-led communism, the underlying socialist critiques of capitalism and aspirations for a more egalitarian society continue to resonate globally. The emphasis on collective well-being, social solidarity, and economic justice remains a central tenet, unifying the diverse currents within the broader socialist tradition. Revolutionary socialism, by contrast, maintains that fundamental societal change can only come through a revolutionary overthrow of the existing capitalist system. This includes various forms of communism and anarchism that seek radical transformations. While the collapse of the Soviet Union impacted the perception of state-led communism, the underlying socialist critiques of capitalism and aspirations for a more egalitarian society continue to resonate globally. The emphasis on collective well-being, social solidarity, and economic justice remains a central tenet, unifying the diverse currents within the broader socialist tradition. Anarchism, the rejection of authority. Anarchism stands as a radical critique of all forms of involuntary authority, particularly the state. derived from the Greek anarchos, meaning without rulers. Anarchists believe that the state is inherently oppressive and unnecessary, leading to hierarchy, exploitation, and violence. They argue that humans are naturally cooperative and capable of organizing themselves peacefully without coercion. Rather than seeking to seize control of the state, anarchists aim to abolish it entirely, along with other coercive institutions like capitalism, and replace them with voluntary associations, direct democracy, and mutual aid. Anarchism is not a monolithic ideology. It encompasses diverse strands. Anarcho-communists, like Peter Kropotkin, advocate for a stateless society based on common ownership of resources and production, with distribution according to need. Anarcho-syndicalists focus on revolutionary trade unions as the means to overthrow capitalism and establish worker-controlled industries. Individualist anarchists, such as Max Stirner, emphasize individual autonomy and self-ownership, often rejecting even community-imposed norms. While their methods and ultimate visions differ, all anarchists share a deep skepticism of power structures and a commitment to radical freedom and self-governance. The practicality of a stateless society and the potential for chaos are common criticisms leveled against anarchist ideals. Fascism, the primacy of nation and state. Fascism is a far-right, authoritarian ultranationalist political ideology characterized by dictatorial power, forcible suppression of opposition, and strong regimentation of society and the economy. Originating in early 20th century Italy with Benito Mussolini and spreading to Germany with Nazism under Adolf Hitler, fascism fundamentally rejects liberalism, communism, and often conservatism, though it may borrow elements from the latter. Key tenets of fascism include an extreme emphasis on the nation or race as the highest political entity, demanding total loyalty from its citizens. The individual is subordinate to the collective, and sacrifice for the nation is glorified. Fascism is anti-rational, often relying on myths, emotion, and charismatic leadership to mobilize the masses. It embraces a cult of the leader, who embodies the will of the nation. Economically, fascism typically features a controlled economy, though not necessarily state ownership of all means of production, where private enterprise serves national goals and labor is organized into state-controlled corporations. Militarism is central, with a belief in the necessity of struggle, war, and imperial expansion to achieve national greatness. Fascist regimes are characterized by pervasive propaganda, censorship, and the use of violence against internal and external enemies. Its historical manifestations have been devastating, leading to widespread human rights abuses and global conflict. Environmentalism/green politics, sustainability and ecological justice. Environmentalism, or green politics, emerged as a significant ideology in the latter half of the 20th century, driven by growing awareness of ecological crises and the limits of natural resources. Unlike other ideologies that primarily focus on human-to-human relationships, green politics places the non-human world and the health of the planet at its core. It argues that industrial growth, anthropocentrism, human-centeredness, and unsustainable consumption patterns are leading to ecological collapse, threatening both human well-being and the planet's biodiversity. Central to green politics is the concept of ecological sustainability, meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. This often involves advocating for renewable energy, conservation, waste reduction, and a shift away from a growth-at-all-costs economic model. Deep ecology, a more radical strain, challenges the anthropocentric worldview entirely, advocating for the intrinsic value of all living things and ecosystems. Social ecology, conversely, links environmental degradation to social hierarchies and injustices, arguing that liberation from human oppression is intertwined with ecological liberation. Green parties around the world advocate for policies such as carbon taxes, protection of biodiversity, promotion of public transport, and a greater emphasis on local economies. While often associated with the political left due to its critiques of capitalism and its calls for state intervention in environmental protection, environmental concerns have also gained traction across the political spectrum. Feminism, gender equality, and social justice. Feminism is not a single ideology, but a broad intellectual and political movement that advocates for the social, economic, and political equality of the sexes. It critiques patriarchal structures and norms that have historically disadvantaged women and other marginalized genders. Feminist thought has evolved through several waves, each addressing different facets of gender inequality. First wave feminism, largely in the 19th and early 20th centuries, focused primarily on legal and political rights, most notably the right to vote suffrage. Second wave feminism, 1960s to 1980s, expanded the focus to address a broader range of social and cultural inequalities, including reproductive rights, workplace discrimination, domestic violence, and the role of women in the private sphere. The personal is political. Third wave feminism, 1990s present, critically examined the limitations of earlier waves, particularly their focus on the experiences of white, middle-class women, and emphasized intersectionality, the idea that gender inequality intersects with other forms of oppression based on race, class, sexuality, and nationality. Different feminist perspectives exist. Liberal feminism seeks equality within existing political and economic systems, advocating for equal opportunities and legal reforms. Radical feminism argues that patriarchy is deeply embedded in society and requires fundamental societal transformation, sometimes advocating for separatism or the complete dismantling of gender roles. Socialist feminism connects women's oppression to capitalist economic structures and calls for a transformation of both. Postmodern feminism challenges fixed notions of gender and identity, emphasizing diversity and deconstructing power relations in discourse. Despite their differences, all feminists share a commitment to challenging gender-based discrimination and working towards a more equitable society. Religious fundamentalism / theocracy, divine law and social order. Religious fundamentalism, as a political force, involves the belief that a particular religious text or set of doctrines should serve as the ultimate basis for social, moral, and political order. It typically involves a literal interpretation of sacred texts, a rejection of secularism, and a desire to implement religious law, e.g., Sharia law in some Islamic contexts, or biblical law in certain Christian fundamentalist movements, as the supreme law of the land. When this leads to direct rule by religious authorities, or a system where the state is governed by divine law, it is known as a theocracy. Fundamentalist movements often arise in response to perceived moral decay, globalization, or the challenges of modernity, seeking to restore what they view as a pure, more authentic way of life. They typically emphasize traditional values, social conservatism, and strict adherence to religious norms, often with a hierarchical social structure. While drawing from specific religious traditions, the political manifestations of fundamentalism can share characteristics across faiths, including authoritarian tendencies, intolerance of dissent, and a belief in the inerrancy of their sacred texts. These movements often challenge human rights frameworks that prioritize individual autonomy and secular governance, leading to significant tensions with liberal democracies. Political ideologies, niche and contemporary perspectives, Part 4. Beyond the major foundational ideologies, the political landscape is populated by numerous more specific or emergent frameworks. These often arise from particular social movements, technological shifts, or a re-evaluation of existing power structures. Libertarianism, maximizing individual freedom, while sharing roots with classical liberalism. Libertarianism takes the commitment to individual liberty to its most extreme logical conclusion, often advocating for minimal or no state intervention in both economic and personal spheres. Libertarians believe that the sole legitimate function of government is to protect individual rights, primarily life, liberty, and property, and enforce contracts. Any further state action, they argue, is an infringement on personal freedom. Key tenets of libertarianism include minimal state. Minarchy, the state's role should be limited to national defense, police protection, and a court system. Free markets. A strong belief in laissez-faire capitalism, with no government regulation of the economy, no taxes for social welfare programs, and the unfettered right to accumulate wealth. Individual sovereignty. Individuals have absolute self-ownership and the right to make choices about their own bodies and lives, so long as they do not infringe upon the rights of others. This leads to stances supporting drug decriminalization, free speech, even for offensive views, and often the right to bear arms. Non-interventionist foreign policy. A general skepticism of foreign wars and interventions, viewing them as costly infringements on liberty and national resources. Libertarianism can attract adherents from both the left on social issues like drug policy and personal choice, and the right on economic issues like low taxes and deregulation, though it is generally considered a right-leaning ideology due to its strong emphasis on economic freedom. Critics often argue that its minimal state approach leads to unchecked corporate power, vast social inequality, and a lack of safety nets for the vulnerable. Communitarianism. The importance of community and shared values. Communitarianism emerged, in part, as a critique of what it perceives as the excessive individualism of liberalism, while not rejecting individual rights entirely. Communitarians emphasize the vital role of the community, shared values, traditions, and social responsibility in shaping individual identity and fostering a healthy society. They argue that individuals are not atomized units, but are deeply embedded in and constituted by their social relationships and cultural contexts. Key features of communitarian thought include focus on the common good, prioritizing the well-being of the community and its shared values over purely individualistic pursuits, civic virtue and responsibility, stressing the importance of active participation in civic life and the fulfillment of duties to the community, not just the assertion of rights. Role of intermediate institutions. Valuing the importance of families, local communities, religious groups, and voluntary associations as mediating forces between the individual and the state. Morality and social order. Believing that a shared moral framework, often derived from tradition or community consensus, is essential for social cohesion and stability. Communitarian ideas can be found across the political spectrum. Some conservatives embrace communitarian ideas to advocate for traditional family structures and local community bonds. Some on the left might draw on communitarianism to argue for stronger social solidarity and collective responsibility in addressing social problems. Critics sometimes worry that a strong emphasis on community can lead to conformity, stifle individual expression, or result in the oppression of minority views in the name of the common good. Postcolonialism. Deconstructing imperial legacies. Postcolonialism is an intellectual and political framework that emerged from the experiences of former colonies in the wake of European imperialism. It critically examines the lasting impacts of colonialism, not just political and economic, but also cultural, psychological, and intellectual. Postcolonial theory seeks to deconstruct the power dynamics, narratives, and knowledge systems established during the colonial era, which often privileged Western perspectives and marginalized the voices and experiences of the colonized. Key themes in postcolonial thought include critique of Eurocentrism, challenging the idea that European experiences and knowledge are universal or superior, identity and hybridity. Exploring the complex, often fractured identities of people in post-colonial societies, shaped by both indigenous and colonial influences. Subaltern voices, giving voice to marginalized groups and perspectives that were silenced or misrepresented during colonial rule. Neo-colonialism, analyzing how former colonial powers continue to exert influence through economic, political, and cultural means, even after formal independence. Development critiques, questioning Western-centric models of development and proposing alternative pathways based on local contexts and needs. While not a prescriptive political ideology in the same way as liberalism or socialism, postcolonialism provides a critical lens through which to analyze global power relations, international aid, cultural representation, and historical narratives. It has profound implications for understanding issues of justice, sovereignty, and self-determination in the global South and beyond. Eco-socialism, environmentalism, and social justice through systemic change. Eco-socialism is a political ideology that combines aspects of environmentalism and socialism, arguing that environmental degradation and social injustice are fundamentally linked to the capitalist system. Unlike mainstream environmentalism, which might seek solutions within the existing economic framework, e.g., through carbon trading or technological fixes, eco-socialists contend that truly addressing ecological crises requires a fundamental transformation of economic and social relations. Core arguments of eco-socialism: capitalism as the root cause. Believing that capitalism's inherent drive for endless growth, profit maximization, and commodification of nature leads to resource depletion, pollution, and the exploitation of both human labor and the environment. Social justice and ecology, arguing that environmental burdens disproportionately affect marginalized communities and the global South, making environmental justice inseparable from social justice. Collective ownership and democratic planning, advocating for collective control over the means of production and resources, allowing for democratic planning that prioritizes ecological sustainability and social needs over private profit. Beyond growth, challenging the dominant paradigm of economic growth and promoting concepts like degrowth or steady-state economies. Eco-socialists envision a society where human activity is harmonized with ecological limits and where resources are managed democratically for the common good. They propose radical changes in production, consumption, and social organization to create an ecologically sustainable and socially just world. Transhumanism, the future of humanity and technology. Transhumanism is a philosophical and intellectual movement that advocates for the enhancement of the human condition through technology, particularly by overcoming limitations such imposed by aging, disease, and cognitive and physical boundaries. While not strictly a political ideology, it has significant political implications and policy aspirations. Key goals and beliefs of transhumanism include radical life extension, using biotechnology, nanotechnology, and other medical advancements to significantly extend healthy human lifespan. Cognitive enhancement, utilizing technologies to improve intelligence, memory, and cognitive abilities. Physical enhancement, employing prosthetics, genetic engineering, or other means to augment physical capabilities. Technological progress as key, believing that scientific and technological advancement is crucial for human flourishing and solving global challenges. Ethical considerations, debating the ethical implications of these enhancements, questions of access, equality, and what it means to be human in a technologically advanced future. The political dimensions of transhumanism relate to debates over funding for scientific research, the ethics of genetic engineering, the regulation of emerging technologies, and potential social inequalities that could arise if only a privileged few have access to life-extending or enhancing technologies. It forces us to consider the future of human nature and society in an era of rapid technological change. Political ideologies, further niche and specific currents, Part 5. While the major ideologies provide broad frameworks, the tapestry of political thought also includes numerous specialized or less prominent currents. These often arise from unique historical contexts, specific philosophical arguments, or particular social conditions, offering distinct perspectives on how society should be organized or how power should be exercised. Objectivism, rational self-interest and laissez-faire. Objectivism is a philosophical system developed by the Russian-American writer Ayn Rand, which she presented as a philosophy for living on Earth. While it encompasses metaphysics, epistemology, ethics, and aesthetics, it has strong political implications, primarily advocating for a specific form of capitalism and individual rights. Key political tenets of objectivism include rational egoism, the belief that the moral purpose of one's life is the pursuit of one's own rational self-interest. Altruism, self-sacrifice for others, is rejected as a moral ideal. Laissez-faire capitalism, an advocacy for a completely unregulated, free market capitalist system where individuals are free to produce, trade, and accumulate wealth without government interference. Any form of government intervention in the economy, e.g., welfare, regulations, progressive taxation, is seen as a violation of individual rights and an act of looting. Limited government. The only legitimate functions of government are to protect individual rights through the police, military, and courts. All other government functions are considered illegitimate and coercive. Individual rights as absolute. Rights are seen as moral principles of action, defining and sanctioning a man's freedom of action in a social context. They are negative rights, freedom from interference, not positive rights, entitlements to goods or services. Objectivism is often associated with libertarianism, sharing many economic and anti-state positions. However, objectivism is a complete philosophical system with specific ethical foundations that distinguish it from pure libertarianism, which can be grounded in various ethical theories. Critics argue that objectivism's emphasis on rational self-interest can lead to social atomization, disregard for the less fortunate, and the legitimation of extreme inequality. Agrarianism, the virtue of rural life and land stewardship. Agrarianism is a social and political philosophy that values rural society, farming, and land ownership over urban and industrial life. It often romanticizes the independent farmer as the backbone of society and sees agricultural work as inherently virtuous, promoting self-sufficiency, strong communities, and a direct connection to nature. Agrarianism is typically skeptical of industrialization, urbanization, and excessive technological advancement, viewing them as destructive to social fabric, moral values, and ecological balance. Core ideas of agrarianism: stewardship of land, emphasis on responsible care for the land and natural resources, contrasting with exploitative industrial practices. Decentralization, preference for local communities and economies, often opposing large-scale, centralized power structures. Simplicity and self-sufficiency, valuing a simpler way of life, independent of complex market forces and consumerism. Moral and cultural importance of farming, believing that agricultural life fosters strong moral character, traditional values, and stable social orders. Historically, agrarian movements have emerged in various contexts, often in response to industrialization or the enclosure of common lands. While no longer a dominant political force, its ideas resonate within environmental movements, especially those advocating for local food systems and sustainable agriculture, critiques of globalization, and some conservative strands that emphasize traditional lifestyles. Critics might argue that it is unrealistic in a modern, globalized world and can lead to romanticized or exclusionary views of rural life. Distributism, widespread ownership of productive property. Distributism is an economic philosophy that arose in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, primarily from Catholic social teaching, particularly the encyclicals Rerum Novarum, Leo XIII, and Quadragesimo Anno, Pius XI. It seeks to strike a middle path between unbridled capitalism and state socialism, arguing that neither system effectively promotes justice or human flourishing. Its central tenet is the widespread distribution of productive property, rather than its concentration in the hands of a few, capitalism, or the state, socialism. Key principles of distributism: subsidiarity. Decisions should be made at the lowest possible level of authority. Higher authorities should only intervene when lower ones are unable to address issues effectively. Personalism. Emphasis on the dignity and autonomy of the human person, ensuring that economic systems serve human flourishing, not vice versa. Worker cooperatives and small businesses. Promotion of forms of ownership, where workers collectively own and manage their enterprises, or where individuals own small, independent businesses. Guilds/vocational groups. Advocacy for occupational organizations that regulate trades and professions, fostering solidarity and ethical practices. Anti-usury, a historical concern about charging interest on loans, viewing it as exploitative. Distributists would advocate for policies that make it easier for ordinary people to own productive assets, tools, land, workshops, shares in cooperatives, rather than merely being wage laborers. This could include tax incentives for small businesses, anti-monopoly laws, and support for credit unions. Figures like G.K. Chesterton and Hilaire Belloc were prominent proponents. Critics might question its feasibility in a modern industrial economy and argue that it risks economic inefficiency or a lack of scale. Technocracy. Governance by experts and technical merit. Technocracy is a system of governance where decision-makers are selected on the basis of their expertise in a given area of responsibility, particularly technical and scientific knowledge, rather than on political affiliation, popular election, or inherited status. It emerged as a concept in the early 20th century, particularly during the Great Depression, as a proposed solution to the perceived inefficiencies and irrationalities of democratic and capitalist systems. Core ideas of technocracy: rule by experts, belief that complex societal problems, economic, environmental, social, can best be solved by engineers, scientists, economists, and other technical specialists. Efficiency and rationality. Focus on optimizing societal outcomes through data-driven analysis, scientific methods, and rational planning. Rejection of politics. Often sees traditional politics, party competition, ideological debates as inefficient, irrational, and obstructive to effective governance. Meritocracy of knowledge. Power and authority are based on demonstrated competence and knowledge, not popular appeal or wealth. Actual technocratic governments are rare, as they fundamentally challenge democratic principles. However, elements of technocratic thought can be seen in the increasing reliance on expert commissions, scientific advisors, and specialized agencies in modern governance. Critics argue that technocracy is undemocratic, lacks accountability, and risks creating an unrepresentative elite that may disregard public values or human rights in pursuit of efficiency. Localism, decentralization, and community empowerment. Localism, in a political context, is an ideology that advocates for the decentralization of power and decision-making to the local community level. It emphasizes the importance of local autonomy, self-governance, and the belief that problems are best solved by those directly affected by them, rather than by distant national or international authorities. It often aligns with principles of subsidiarity and can be a component of various other ideologies. Key aspects of localism: community control, empowering local residents and their elected bodies to make decisions about economic development, planning, education, and social services. Resilience and self-reliance, encouraging local economies, food systems, and energy production to reduce dependence on global supply chains and external actors. Democratic participation, promoting direct democracy, community meetings, and participatory budgeting at the local level. Diversity of solutions, recognizing that what works in one community may not work in another, and valuing tailored, local solutions. Localism can appeal to a wide range of political leanings. Some conservatives might embrace it for its emphasis on traditional community bonds and reduced central government. Some on the left might see it as a way to empower marginalized communities and build grassroots social movements. Environmentalists often advocate for local food and energy systems. Critics might point to potential inefficiencies, a lack of resources at the local level, or the risk of NIMBYism, not in my backyard, where local interests obstruct broader societal needs. Political ideologies in practice. Navigating key societal domains, Part 6. Political ideologies are not merely theoretical constructs. They are living frameworks that guide how societies are organized, resources are distributed, and policies are formulated. Their influence is evident in every facet of public life, from the economy to education, and from healthcare to international relations. Understanding these practical implications reveals the fundamental differences in how various ideologies envision a just and prosperous society. 1. Economy and work. Liberalism, classical/neoliberal, strongly advocates for free markets, private property, and minimal government intervention, believes that individual initiative and competition drive prosperity. Policies include deregulation, low taxes, free trade agreements, and a limited social safety net. Modern social liberalism, however, acknowledges market failures and supports some regulation, progressive taxation, and social welfare programs, e.g. unemployment benefits, Social Security, to mitigate inequality and ensure a basic standard of living, believing this enhances overall liberty. Conservatism generally supports capitalism and private enterprise, but often with a greater emphasis on order, stability, and national interest. May favor some protectionist measures or state support for key industries deemed vital for national security or traditional economic sectors, more inclined towards individual responsibility in the market. But paternalistic conservatives might support some social welfare out of a sense of moral duty or to prevent social unrest. Socialism critiques capitalism's inherent inequalities and advocates for greater collective control over the economy. Democratic socialists push for policies like nationalization of essential services, healthcare, utilities, strong labor unions, robust welfare states, progressive taxation, and wealth redistribution. Revolutionary socialists aim for the abolition of private ownership of the means of production and a centrally planned economy. Anarchism rejects all state and capitalist control over the economy. Proponents envision decentralized, voluntary economic arrangements, such as worker cooperatives, mutual aid networks, and gift economies, without hierarchy or exploitation. Fascism subordinates the economy to the interests of the state and nation, while not outright rejecting private property. It imposes strict state control and direction over industry and labor, often through corporatism, state-controlled syndicates of employers and employees, to serve national goals, e.g. rearmament, imperial expansion. Libertarianism demands near-total non-intervention in the economy, opposes all forms of taxation beyond what's strictly necessary for defense and basic law enforcement, rejecting welfare, regulations, and public services. Advocates for complete free markets and individual economic freedom. Distributism seeks to decentralize economic power by promoting widespread individual or family ownership of productive property, farms, workshops, small businesses, worker cooperatives, rather than concentrated ownership by corporations or the state. 2. Healthcare. Liberalism, modern/social, often supports universal healthcare access, viewing healthcare as a right. This can manifest as publicly funded systems, single-payer, regulated multi-payer systems, like the Affordable Care Act in the U.S., or comprehensive social insurance schemes. Emphasizes equitable access regardless of ability to pay. Liberalism, classical/neoliberal, and libertarianism advocates for a market-based healthcare system, believing that private competition and consumer choice lead to efficiency and quality. Opposes universal, state-funded healthcare, arguing it infringes on individual liberty and is inefficient. Proposes private insurance, health savings accounts, and direct payment models. Conservatism tends to favor market-based solutions, but may support some limited safety nets for the truly needy, often through private charities or targeted programs rather than universal state provision. Often emphasizes individual responsibility for health and opposes large-scale government intervention. Socialism strongly advocates for universal, publicly funded healthcare as a fundamental human right, supports national health services where healthcare is largely provided and funded by the state, aiming for equity of access and elimination of private profit motives in healthcare. Environmentalism/green politics views healthcare through a holistic lens, connecting human health to environmental health, advocates for preventative care, addressing root causes of illness, e.g. pollution, unhealthy food systems, and policies that promote overall well-being and ecological balance. 3. Education. Liberalism, modern/social, generally supports universal, publicly funded education, viewing it as crucial for equality of opportunity and an informed citizenry, advocates for diverse curricula, critical thinking, and often supports higher education accessibility through public funding or student aid. Liberalism, classical/neoliberal, and libertarianism may advocate for school choice, charter schools, and privatization of education, believing competition improves quality, supports parental control over education and minimal government curriculum mandates. Conservatism emphasizes traditional values, discipline, and a standardized curriculum focusing on core subjects, e.g. history, math, literature, often supports local control of schools, parental rights, and sometimes religious instruction, may also favor school choice or vouchers. Socialism advocates for free, universal, and high-quality public education at all levels, aimed at reducing social inequality and fostering collective responsibility, often supports comprehensive education systems that cater to diverse needs and promote critical social awareness. Anarchism rejects state-controlled education, advocating for self-directed learning, homeschooling, or community-based, voluntary educational initiatives. Emphasizes freedom of inquiry and education that fosters individual autonomy and critical thinking outside of state influence. 4. Crime and justice. Liberalism, modern/social, focuses on rehabilitation, addressing root causes of crime, e.g. poverty, lack of opportunity, and protecting civil liberties and due process rights for the accused. Advocates for police reform, alternatives to incarceration, and restorative justice. Conservatism emphasizes law and order, strict punishment, and deterrence. Supports strong police forces, harsher sentencing, including mandatory minimums, and focuses on individual responsibility for criminal acts. May favor increased prison capacity. Libertarianism advocates for decriminalization of victimless crimes, e.g. drug use, and robust protections against government surveillance and overreach. Opposes mass incarceration and excessive police powers, focusing on protecting individual rights even for the accused. Socialism attributes crime, primarily to systemic social and economic inequalities. Advocates for addressing these inequalities to reduce crime, emphasizing rehabilitation, community-based solutions, and opposing punitive measures that disproportionately affect marginalized groups. Fascism utilizes the justice system as a tool of state control and repression, employs aggressive policing, harsh punishments, and limits civil liberties in the name of national security and social order, often targets political dissidents or minority groups perceived as threats to national unity. 5. International relations. Liberalism advocates for international cooperation, multilateral institutions, e.g. UN, WTO, diplomacy, and the promotion of democracy and human rights globally, believes in interdependence and the potential for peaceful resolution of conflicts through shared norms and laws. Conservatism often emphasizes national interest and sovereignty, may be skeptical of international institutions that seem to infringe on national decision-making, can support a strong military for national defense and prudent engagement based on strategic interests. Socialism advocates for international solidarity among workers and oppressed peoples, critiques imperialism, neocolonialism, and global economic inequality, seeks a more equitable and peaceful world order based on cooperation rather than competition or exploitation. Nationalism prioritizes the interests of the nation above all else, can lead to protectionist trade policies, an assertive foreign policy to secure national advantage, and a skeptical or hostile stance towards international cooperation if it is perceived to dilute national sovereignty or identity. Fascism, characterized by aggressive nationalism, militarism, and often imperialistic aims, views international relations as a struggle for dominance and national glory, potentially leading to expansionist policies and conflict. Anarchism rejects the concept of nation-states and their conflicts, advocating for a world without borders, governed by voluntary federations of local communities and direct cooperation among peoples. 6. Media and information. Liberalism supports freedom of the press, diversity of media ownership, and open access to information, champions investigative journalism, and a robust public sphere where various viewpoints can be debated, may advocate for regulations to prevent media monopolies. Conservatism generally supports a free press, but may critique media bias perceived as liberal or anti-establishment, emphasizes traditional journalistic ethics, and may advocate for media that reinforces national values. Socialism critiques corporate control of media, arguing it serves capitalist interests and limits true diversity of information, may advocate for public ownership or strong regulation of media to ensure accessibility, accuracy, and representation of diverse perspectives. Authoritarianism/fascism exercises strict state control over media and information, utilizing censorship and propaganda to promote the ruling ideology and suppress dissent. Independent journalism is suppressed, and media serves as a tool for political indoctrination and mobilization. Libertarianism advocates for absolute freedom of speech and press, with no government regulation or censorship whatsoever, even for harmful content, believing that the marketplace of ideas will ultimately lead to truth. Political ideologies, evolution, intersection, and future challenges, Part 7. Having explored various political ideologies and their practical applications, it's vital to recognize that these frameworks are not immutable. They are dynamic constructs, constantly evolving, intersecting, and adapting to new realities. Understanding these broader dynamics allows for a more nuanced appreciation of political discourse and the challenges societies face. 1. The evolution and adaptation of ideologies. No political ideology remains frozen in time. They are constantly being reinterpreted, challenged, and modified by their adherents in response to changing social, economic, and technological landscapes. Historical context. Ideologies are products of their time. Classical liberalism, for instance, emerged as a challenge to aristocratic privilege and absolute monarchy. Modern liberalism adapted in response to the social dislocations of industrial capitalism. Conservatism evolved from reacting to revolutionary change to embracing specific market principles. Internal debates and factions. Within every broad ideology, there are internal debates and different factions. For example, within socialism, there are democratic socialists, revolutionary socialists, eco-socialists, and so on. These internal tensions contribute to the evolution and diversification of the core ideas. Response to new challenges. Global events, technological advancements, and new social issues force ideologies to adapt or risk becoming irrelevant. Climate change, for example, has spurred the growth of green politics and influenced existing ideologies to incorporate environmental concerns, e.g., green conservatism, eco-socialism. The rise of AI and biotechnology is pushing discussions within transhumanism and prompting ethical considerations across the political spectrum. Rhetorical adaptation. Ideologies often adjust their language and focus to appeal to new generations or different demographics, sometimes without fundamentally changing their core principles. 2. The fluidity of the left-right spectrum and beyond. The traditional left-right political spectrum, rooted in the seating arrangements of the French National Assembly, is a common heuristic for categorizing ideologies. Left, traditionally associated with equality, social justice, collective responsibility, progress, and often state intervention in the economy and society, includes most forms of socialism, communism, and often modern liberalism and many green parties. Right, traditionally associated with hierarchy, order, individual liberty, especially economic, tradition, and often limited state intervention in the economy, though strong state in social matters. Includes most forms of conservatism, classical liberalism, libertarianism, and fascism, which is far-right authoritarian. However, this linear spectrum is often an oversimplification. Social versus economic dimensions. Some models propose a two-dimensional spectrum, distinguishing between economic left/right, e.g., state intervention versus free market, and social left/right, e.g., progressive versus traditional values. For instance, libertarians are economically right, but socially left, while social conservatives are economically right, but socially right. Authoritarian versus libertarian axis. Another common addition is an authoritarian-libertarian axis. This helps place ideologies like anarchism, extreme libertarian, and fascism, extreme authoritarian, more accurately, regardless of their economic stance. The horseshoe theory. Some argue that the extreme left and extreme right converge on certain points, such as a rejection of liberal democracy, a belief in revolutionary change, or a willingness to use authoritarian means to achieve their goals. Beyond the lines, many political issues and individual beliefs don't fit neatly on any spectrum. For example, a strong localist could be economically left, but socially conservative, or vice versa. 3. The role of global challenges in shaping ideologies. Contemporary global challenges are profoundly influencing and reshaping existing political ideologies, often creating new intersections and tensions. Climate change. This existential threat is forcing all ideologies to grapple with environmental responsibility. Some advocate for radical systemic change, eco-socialism, others for market-based solutions, eco-capitalism, while some conservatives prioritize economic growth and technological fixes, or even deny the severity of the crisis. Technological revolution, AI, biotechnology, the rapid advancements in AI, automation, and biotechnology pose fundamental questions about work, human nature, privacy, and power. This fuels transhumanist debates, creates new ethical dilemmas for traditional religions and human rights advocates, and forces economic ideologies to reconsider the future of labor and wealth distribution. Globalization and nationalism. The interconnectedness fostered by globalization has provoked a strong nationalist backlash in many parts of the world. This tension between global cooperation and national sovereignty is a defining feature of contemporary political discourse, shaping trade policies, immigration debates, and international relations. Pandemics and public health. Global health crises expose ideological fault lines regarding state power versus individual liberty, social solidarity versus personal responsibility, and the role of science in public policy. They challenge notions of national self-sufficiency and the effectiveness of international bodies. Information warfare and disinformation. The digital age has brought new challenges to traditional liberal ideals of a free press and an informed public. Ideologies are now contending with the spread of misinformation, the erosion of trust in institutions, and the fragmentation of public discourse. 4. The end of ideology debate. In the mid-20th century, particularly after World War II, some prominent intellectuals, like Daniel Bell, argued for an end of ideology. They suggested that major ideological conflicts, e.g. capitalism versus communism, were fading, replaced by consensus around pragmatic, technocratic problem-solving and welfare state liberalism. However, subsequent decades, marked by the rise of new social movements, civil rights, environmentalism, the resurgence of identity politics, the fall of the Berlin Wall, and the rise of populism, have largely disproven this notion. Ideologies continue to provide the frameworks through which individuals and groups understand their place in the world, articulate their grievances, and propose visions for the future. While the specific forms and dominant ideologies may shift, the human need for coherent belief systems to navigate the complexities of political life remains. You're asking for even more depth, which is great. To continue building on the comprehensive overview we've established, let's now explore how contemporary dynamics, such as identity politics and the influence of postmodern thought, shape and interact with established political ideologies. We'll also touch upon the practical embodiment of ideologies within political parties and the broader concept of political culture. Political ideologies, identity, culture, and the party system. Part 8. The landscape of political ideologies is not only shaped by historical evolution and global challenges, but also by emergent social dynamics and the very structures through which political power is sought and exercised. Contemporary discussions are increasingly influenced by identity, the critical lens of postmodernism, and the practical realities of political parties operating within specific cultural contexts. 1. Identity politics and intersectionality. Reshaping the ideological landscape. While traditional ideologies often focused on class socialism, individual rights, liberalism, or national belonging nationalism, the latter half of the 20th century and the early 21st century saw the rise of identity politics. This refers to political organizing and theorizing that is based on the shared experiences of injustice or discrimination faced by groups defined by characteristics such as race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, disability, or religion. Critique of universalism. Identity politics often critiques the universalist claims of traditional ideologies, arguing that concepts like individual liberty or equality have historically been defined from the perspective of dominant groups, e.g., white, male, heterosexual, and have failed to address the specific oppressions faced by marginalized communities. Intersectionality. Coined by legal scholar Kimberly Crenshaw, Intersectionality is a key concept within identity politics. It posits that various social and political identities combine to create unique modes of discrimination and privilege. For example, the experience of a black woman is not merely the sum of being black plus being a woman. Her experience of discrimination is unique to that specific intersection of identities. Influence on existing ideologies. Feminism evolved significantly with intersectional critiques, moving beyond a focus on gender to incorporate race, class, and sexuality. Socialism has seen new forms emerge, like Black Marxism or queer socialism, that integrate anti-racist and LGBTQ plus liberation struggles into the broader class struggle. Liberalism grapples with how to reconcile universal individual rights with the specific needs and collective rights often demanded by identity groups. This often leads to debates over affirmative action, reparations, and cultural recognition. Conservatism. Some conservative movements react against identity politics, viewing it as divisive or a threat to national unity, while others may incorporate identity appeals based on religious or national identity. Challenges and debates. Identity politics is a source of intense debate. Critics sometimes argue it leads to fragmentation, tribalism, or a focus on group grievances over universal human solidarity. Proponents argue it is essential for addressing systemic injustices that are otherwise overlooked by colorblind or genderblind approaches. 2. The influence of postmodernism on political thought. Postmodernism, an intellectual movement emerging in the mid to late 20th century, critically questions grand narratives, universal truths, and objective knowledge, emphasizing the role of power, discourse, and subjectivity in shaping reality. While not a political ideology itself, its ideas have profoundly influenced how ideologies are understood and critiqued. Deconstruction of grand narratives. Postmodern thought encourages a skeptical view of the meta-narratives offered by traditional ideologies, e.g., the inevitable march towards communism, the triumph of liberal democracy, or the unchanging nature of tradition. It suggests these narratives are often constructed to legitimize power structures. Power and knowledge. Drawing from thinkers like Michel Foucault, postmodernism highlights how knowledge and truth are not neutral, but are intricately tied to power relations. This leads to critical analyses of how ideologies are produced, disseminated, and used to maintain social control. Discourse and language. Emphasis is placed on how language and discourse construct reality and identity. This encourages analysis of the rhetoric used by political ideologies and how it shapes public perception. Fluidity of identity. Postmodernism contributes to the idea of identity as fluid, constructed, and performative rather than fixed or essential, which has strong implications for identity politics. Impact on political movements. This critical lens often informs movements that challenge established norms, power structures, and conventional wisdom. It can lead to a healthy skepticism of authority, but can also be critiqued for promoting relativism or undermining the basis for collective action around shared truths. 3. Ideology and political parties. The practical manifestation. Political parties serve as the primary vehicles for translating ideologies into practical policy and governance. However, the relationship between ideology and party is complex and dynamic. Ideological anchor. Historically, many parties were founded on clear ideological principles, e.g., socialist parties, liberal parties, conservative parties. The party platform, membership, and leadership were typically aligned with these core tenets. Catch-all parties. In many modern democracies, parties have evolved into catch-all parties, attempting to appeal to a broad spectrum of voters rather than a narrow ideological base. This often leads to a moderation of ideological purity, a focus on pragmatic solutions, and an embrace of policies that borrow from various ideological traditions. Factionalism. Even within catch-all parties, ideological factions often exist, e.g., fiscal conservatives versus social conservatives, progressive liberals versus centrist liberals. These internal debates can shape party direction. Leader-driven ideology. Sometimes, charismatic leaders can significantly shift a party's ideological direction, temporarily or permanently, making the party's ideology more reflective of the leader's vision than a deeply ingrained set of beliefs. Electoral strategy. The need to win elections often trumps strict ideological adherence. Parties may adopt popular policies, even if they contradict their historical ideological stance, to appeal to swing voters. Party systems. The nature of a country's party system, e.g., two-party versus multi-party, also affects ideological expression. Multi-party systems often allow for more ideologically distinct parties, while two-party systems typically force broader ideological coalitions. 4. Political culture. The local context of ideologies. Political ideologies do not operate in a vacuum. They are interpreted and expressed within specific political cultures. Political culture refers to the collection of attitudes, beliefs, values, and norms that shape political behavior and the functioning of a political system within a given society. Historical legacy. A nation's historical experiences, e.g., revolution, colonial past, periods of authoritarianism, profoundly shape its political culture and the ideologies that gain traction. Social norms and values. Deep-seated social norms and values influence how ideologies are perceived and whether they are accepted or rejected. For example, a collectivist culture might be more receptive to socialist ideas than a highly individualistic one. Religious influence. The predominant religious traditions in a society can significantly impact its political culture and the appeal of certain ideologies, as seen in the role of fundamentalism. Media and education. The media landscape and educational system play a crucial role in transmitting and shaping political culture, influencing how ideologies are taught, debated, and understood by the public. Impact on ideologies. Political culture can moderate, radicalize, or otherwise transform the expression of an ideology. For instance, American conservatism has distinct features that differentiate it from British conservatism due to differing historical contexts and cultural values. Political ideologies, challenges, critiques, and enduring relevance. Part 9. In the 21st century, political ideologies face unprecedented challenges, from the rapid evolution of technology to a fragmented information landscape and declining trust in institutions. These pressures test the resilience of established frameworks, while also giving rise to new critiques and forcing a reevaluation of how we understand political belief systems. 1. Challenges to traditional ideological cohesion. The post-truth era and disinformation. The rise of social media and the proliferation of digital platforms have created an environment where factual accuracy often takes a back seat to emotional resonance and confirmation bias. This post-truth era makes it harder for ideologies to rely on shared factual premises or rational argumentation. Disinformation campaigns can exploit existing ideological divisions, radicalize individuals, and undermine consensus. Declining trust in institutions. Across many democracies, there's a measurable decline in trust in traditional institutions, governments, political parties, mainstream media, and even scientific establishments. When trust erodes, the credibility of ideological arguments advanced by these institutions also diminishes, opening space for populist or anti-establishment narratives that often operate outside established ideological bounds. Hyperpartisanship and polarization. While ideologies are inherently about differing visions, modern political discourse in many countries is characterized by extreme polarization. This often reduces complex ideological debates to tribal loyalty, where compromise becomes impossible and the other side is viewed with suspicion or contempt. This can hinder constructive engagement with ideological differences. Globalization and transnational issues. Issues like climate change, global pandemics, cyber warfare, and economic interdependence transcend national borders. Traditional ideologies, often rooted in the nation-state, struggle to provide comprehensive solutions to these transnational problems without either resorting to protectionism or advocating for levels of global governance that challenge national sovereignty. 2. Critiques of ideological thinking itself. Beyond the challenges to specific ideologies, there are broader critiques of ideological thinking in general. Dogmatism and rigidity. Critics argue that ideologies, by their very nature, can lead to dogmatism, a rigid adherence to a fixed set of beliefs, often impervious to new evidence or dissenting opinions. This can stifle critical thinking and lead to intellectual ossification. Totalitarianism. The 20th century provided stark examples of how ideologies, when taken to their extreme and combined with state power, can lead to totalitarian regimes that suppress individual freedom, dissent, and human rights in pursuit of an ideological utopia, e.g. fascism, Stalinism. This history serves as a potent warning against unchecked ideological power. Simplification of complexity. Ideologies necessarily simplify the world to make it understandable and actionable. Critics argue that this simplification can lead to an oversimplified view of complex problems, ignoring nuances and unintended consequences. False consciousness. Marxist theory introduced the concept of false consciousness, suggesting that dominant ideologies can obscure the true nature of power relations and exploitation, leading oppressed groups to unknowingly support systems that work against their own interests. 3. The enduring relevance and future of ideologies. Despite these critiques and challenges, the concept of political ideology remains profoundly relevant and is unlikely to disappear. The human need for meaning. Ideologies offer a framework for understanding the world, a sense of purpose, and a guide for action. They provide answers to fundamental questions about justice, fairness, power, and the good life. This inherent human need for meaning and order ensures the continued existence of belief systems. Tools for collective action. Ideologies mobilize people for collective action. They provide a common language, shared goals, and a sense of solidarity that are necessary for political movements, parties, and social change. Navigating complexity. In an increasingly complex world, ideologies offer simplified pathways for understanding vast amounts of information and making sense of political choices, even if those simplifications are imperfect. Adaptation and hybridization. Instead of disappearing, ideologies are constantly adapting, merging, and spawning new variants. We see the rise of hybrid ideologies, e.g. national conservatism, combining conservative social values with populist nationalism, or market environmentalism, seeking ecological solutions through capitalist means that reflect the ongoing synthesis of ideas. New ideologies on the horizon. As technology progresses and global challenges intensify, it is plausible that entirely new ideological frameworks will emerge, tailored to address issues that are barely conceivable today, e.g., ideologies around post-scarcity, universal basic income in automated societies, or the ethics of human-AI coexistence. Conclusion: the unending dialogue of ideas. Ultimately, the study of political ideologies is not just about memorizing definitions. It's about understanding the fundamental visions that compete for influence in shaping our world. From the foundational arguments for liberty and equality to the complex debates surrounding identity, technology, and planetary survival, ideologies provide the intellectual and emotional architecture of political life. In an era of rapid change and profound uncertainty, the ability to critically engage with, analyze, and even challenge these ideological frameworks becomes paramount. Rather than seeking an end of ideology, our task is to foster a more informed and nuanced understanding of these powerful forces, enabling us to participate more thoughtfully in the ongoing, vital dialogue about how we should live together. The contest of ideas is, and will remain, at the heart of human governance. Okay, we've journeyed through the vast and intricate landscape of political ideologies, from their core tenets to their evolution, challenges, and practical manifestations. To provide a final layer of understanding, let's consider how to engage with this complex world of ideas and briefly acknowledge the immense global diversity in their expression. Political ideologies, navigating the landscape, critical engagement, and global dimensions, Part 10. Understanding political ideologies is not merely an academic exercise. It is a fundamental skill for navigating the complexities of public life. In a world saturated with information and often polarized by competing visions, the ability to critically analyze ideological claims and appreciate their diverse expressions across cultures is more crucial than ever. 1. Critical engagement with ideologies beyond dogma. For citizens, policymakers, and analysts, a critical approach to political ideologies is essential. This involves identifying underlying assumptions. Every ideology rests on a set of core assumptions about human nature, society, and power. Critically asking, what does this ideology assume about people? Or, what does it assume about the role of the state? Helps to uncover its foundational principles and potential biases. For instance, classical liberalism assumes rational, self-interested individuals, while some forms of socialism assume a more communitarian, cooperative human nature. Examining internal consistency. Does an ideology's stated goals align with its proposed methods? Are there contradictions within its various tenets? For example, an ideology that champions freedom but simultaneously advocates for strict censorship might exhibit internal inconsistency. Assessing practical implications and consequences. What are the likely real-world effects if an ideology's principles are fully implemented? Who benefits, and who might be disadvantaged? History offers many lessons on the unintended consequences of ideological pursuits. This moves beyond theoretical appeal to practical outcome, recognizing the myth-making aspect. While ideologies provide frameworks, they also often rely on simplifying narratives, historical interpretations, or even myths to create a compelling vision. Being aware of this rhetorical function helps in discerning persuasive rhetoric from substantive argument, avoiding dogmatism and openness to revision. A healthy engagement with ideologies requires an intellectual humility that acknowledges the limitations of any single framework. Dogmatism, the rigid adherence to an ideology regardless of evidence or critique, hinders learning and constructive dialogue. An open mind allows for the possibility that aspects of different ideologies might offer valuable insights, or that one's own ideological framework might need revision in light of new information or experiences. Understanding nuance and spectrum. Few individuals or parties perfectly embody a single, pure ideology. Most operate within a spectrum, drawing on various influences. Recognizing this nuance helps avoid simplistic labels and encourages a more sophisticated understanding of political actors. 2. Global dimensions of ideological expression. While many of the ideologies discussed, liberalism, socialism, conservatism, originated or gained prominence in the Western world, their expression and interpretation vary significantly across different global contexts. Non-Western adaptations. Ideologies are rarely simply imported. They are adapted to local historical, cultural, and religious contexts. For example, socialism in China, socialism with Chinese characteristics, or Vietnam is vastly different from its European counterparts, integrating elements of nationalism, state control, and market economics in unique ways. Similarly, forms of Asian values, conservatism, or Islamic democracy demonstrate distinct cultural integrations. Indigenous ideologies. Many parts of the world have indigenous political thought systems that precede or exist alongside Western-derived ideologies. These often emphasize concepts like communalism, harmony with nature, ancestral wisdom, or specific forms of justice that may not fit neatly into common ideological categories. The South-North divide, global power imbalances, legacies of colonialism, and differing development trajectories mean that ideologies are often interpreted and applied differently in the global South compared to the global North. For instance, debates around development, sovereignty, and international justice often reflect distinct ideological priorities shaped by historical experiences of exploitation or marginalization, syncretism, and hybridity. In many countries, political systems and popular beliefs are a syncretic blend of multiple ideologies, often combining elements of nationalism, religion, traditional values, and various forms of economic governance. Few nations adhere to a pure ideological model, rise of regional blocs and identity. Beyond traditional nation-state ideologies, the rise of regional political identities, e.g. Pan-Africanism, Pan-Arabism, European integration, also represents distinct ideological aspirations that challenge older frameworks. Conclusion: the unending dialogue of human futures. Political ideologies are the maps humans draw to navigate the complex terrain of collective life. They provide meaning, mobilize action, and offer blueprints for how society should be organized. From the grand visions of global transformation to the subtle nuances of local governance, every policy, every protest, and every election is, at its heart, a manifestation of competing ideological commitments. In a world increasingly characterized by both profound interconnectedness and sharp divisions, the study of political ideologies offers a crucial compass. It equips us not just to understand what people believe, but why they believe it, allowing for more informed analysis, more productive dialogue, and a more critical engagement with the ongoing, vital conversation about human futures. The challenge and the promise lies in our capacity to engage with these diverse ideas, not as rigid dogmas, but as dynamic tools for shaping a world that is both just and sustainable. Okay, we have truly explored the vast and multifaceted realm of political ideologies. We've dissected their core principles, traced their evolution, examined their practical applications across societal domains, considered their contemporary challenges, and highlighted the importance of critical engagement and global variation. To offer a final comprehensive thought, let's reflect on the enduring purpose of ideology in a world that is constantly remaking itself. Political ideologies, the enduring search for meaning and order, Part 11. As we conclude this extensive journey through political ideologies, it becomes clear that these systems of thought are more than just academic classifications. They are fundamental expressions of the human desire to understand, order, and shape the world. In an era defined by rapid change, unprecedented challenges, and a constant influx of information, the role of ideology, while evolving, remains profoundly significant. One ideology as a framework for meaning and action. At their most basic level, ideologies serve a vital cognitive and psychological function. They provide sense-making. In a world of overwhelming complexity, ideologies offer simplified narratives and interpretive frameworks that help individuals make sense of political events, social structures, and economic realities. They provide a lens through which chaos can appear ordered and confusion comprehensible. Moral compass. They often embody a set of moral values and ethical principles, distinguishing between right and wrong, just and unjust. This moral dimension guides individual behavior and collective action. providing a basis for judging policies and systems. Collective identity and belonging. Sharing an ideology fosters a sense of collective identity, solidarity, and belonging among its adherents. It provides a shared language, common goals, and a basis for collective mobilization, which is crucial for political movements and social change. Blueprints for action. Beyond understanding, ideologies offer prescriptive blueprints for how society should be organized. They outline preferred economic systems, forms of governance, social structures, and international relations, providing a roadmap for political action and policy formulation. 2. The dynamic interplay of theory and practice. Political ideologies are not static theories existing only in books. They are constantly shaped by, and in turn, shape the messy realities of political practice. Theory informs practice. Intellectual pioneers develop and refine ideological concepts, which then become the guiding principles for political parties, leaders, and social movements. For instance, the writings of John Locke fueled liberal revolutions, and Karl Marx's theories inspired communist movements. Practice refines theory. Real-world experiences, successes, and failures compel ideologies to adapt. The economic crises of the 20th century led to the evolution of modern liberalism. The collapse of the Soviet Union forced a re-evaluation within socialist thought, and the rise of environmental concerns pushed all ideologies to consider sustainability. Pragmatism versus purity. In the realm of practical politics, there's a constant tension between ideological purity and pragmatic necessity. Parties and leaders often make compromises or adopt policies that deviate from strict ideological adherence to win elections, build coalitions, or address immediate crises. This dynamic fuels internal debates and redefinitions within ideological camps. 3. The enduring and evolving nature of ideological conflict. While some may wish for a post-ideological age where rational consensus prevails, the fundamental differences in human values, priorities, and visions for society ensure that ideological debates will persist. Contest over resources and values. At its heart, political conflict often boils down to a contest over how resources, economic, social, political, should be distributed and which values, e.g., liberty versus equality, tradition versus progress, individual versus collective, should be prioritized. Ideologies provide the frameworks for these competing claims. New divides. While old ideological battles may recede, new ones emerge. The digital age, for example, is spawning ideological debates around data privacy, AI governance, and the very nature of truth and information, creating new fault lines. The increasing focus on identity politics and cultural wars also reflects a shift in where ideological battles are being fought. The global arena. The interplay of ideologies transcends national borders. Global challenges often involve a clash of different ideological approaches to cooperation, sovereignty, and justice, making international relations a complex arena of ideological contestation. Conclusion. A continuing conversation. Every political ideology is a vast and perhaps unattainable target for a single explanation, given their boundless variety and the nuances of human belief. However, this extensive exploration has aimed to provide a robust and intelligent framework for understanding the most significant and influential systems of political thought that have shaped and continue to shape our world. From the foundational arguments for liberty, order, and equality to the critical lenses of feminism and postcolonialism, and the future-oriented visions of transhumanism, ideologies are the language of politics. To engage meaningfully in the public sphere, to understand the motivations behind political action, and to contribute thoughtfully to the ongoing human project of building a better society. A nuanced appreciation of these powerful, dynamic, and ever-present ideas is not just beneficial, it is essential. The conversation about how we should live together, guided by our competing and evolving ideologies, is one that will continue as long as human societies endure. You've articulated a fascinating and challenging request. Venturing into highly specialized academic subfields allows us to explore the theoretical underpinnings, analytical approaches, and complex critiques surrounding the concept of political ideology itself. This moves beyond simply defining ideologies to understanding how they function, why they persist, and how they are analyzed in advanced political theory. Let's delve into some of these more nuanced and academic dimensions. Political ideologies, advanced academic perspectives, Part 12. Beyond the descriptive categorization of political ideologies, academic inquiry delves into more profound questions. What is ideology in a theoretical sense? How does it operate within society? How do individuals come to adopt and adhere to specific ideological frameworks? These questions lead us into specialized fields of study, ranging from critical theory to cognitive science. 1. Theories of ideology, beyond simple belief systems. In advanced political theory, ideology is not merely a collection of beliefs. Scholars have developed complex theories to explain its pervasive nature and its role in power relations. Marxist/neo-Marxist theories, e.g. Althusser, Gramsci. False consciousness, deepened while touched upon earlier in Marxist theory. False consciousness is the idea that the ruling class's ideology permeates society and is adopted by the working class, obscuring their true material interests and preventing revolutionary change. It's not just a mistaken belief, but a systematically produced distortion of reality. Louis Althusser's ideological state apparatuses. ISA's Althusser argued that the state maintains power not just through repressive means, like the police, army, repressive state apparatuses, or RSAs, but primarily through ideological state apparatuses, ISAs. These are institutions like schools, families, media, churches, and trade unions that interpellate, hail, or constitute individuals as subjects who willingly conform to the dominant ideology. Ideology, for Althusser, is a set of practices, rituals, and institutions, not just ideas in people's heads. Antonio Gramsci's hegemony. Gramsci refined Marx's ideas by introducing the concept of hegemony. He argued that the ruling class maintains its dominance not just through force or false consciousness, but by achieving a broad consent among the ruled. This consent is cultivated through the diffusion of its ideology across civil society, e.g., cultural institutions, education, media, making its worldview seem like common sense or the natural order of things. Challenging hegemony requires a counter-hegemony involving intellectual and moral leadership from subordinate classes. Karl Mannheim's Sociology of Knowledge. Mannheim distinguished between ideology, thought systems that serve to justify the existing order, and utopia, thought systems that seek to fundamentally transform the existing order. He argued that all thought, including scientific thought, is existentially determined, meaning it is shaped by the social position and historical context of the thinker. This relativizes all ideologies, seeing them as partial perspectives arising from specific social locations, and emphasizes the need for a free-floating intelligentsia capable of synthesizing these perspectives. Post-structuralist/post-foundationalist approaches, e.g., Laclau and Mouffe, moving beyond traditional understandings of fixed subjects and objective realities. These theories view ideology as fundamentally linked to language and discourse. Discourse theory. Ernesto Laclau and Chantal Mouffe argue that there are no fixed social meanings or identities outside of discourse. Ideology is not a false consciousness, but the very way in which social reality is constructed through language, symbols, and narratives. Political struggles are fundamentally struggles over meaning and the articulation of different discourses, e.g., the people, the nation, freedom. The very coherence of an ideology is always precarious, resting on the articulation of floating signifiers. 2. The psychology and cognitive science of ideological adherence. This specialized field explores the cognitive biases, psychological needs, and neurological processes that contribute to the formation and persistence of ideological beliefs. Motivated reasoning. People are often motivated to process information in a way that confirms their pre-existing beliefs and attitudes, rather than objectively evaluate evidence. This motivated reasoning strengthens ideological convictions and makes them resistant to contradictory information. Cognitive dissonance. When faced with information that conflicts with deeply held ideological beliefs, individuals experience cognitive dissonance, an uncomfortable mental state. They often reduce this dissonance by rejecting the new information, reinterpreting it, or downplaying its importance, rather than changing their ideology. System justification theory. Developed by John T. Jost, this theory posits that people are motivated to believe that the social, economic, and political systems they inhabit are fair, legitimate, and desirable. This psychological need helps explain why disadvantaged groups might sometimes endorse ideologies that perpetuate their own subordination. Personality traits and ideology. Research has explored correlations between certain personality traits and ideological leanings. For example, some studies suggest that openness to experience might correlate with political liberalism, while conscientiousness might correlate with conservatism, though these are complex and debated findings. Group identity and social belonging. Adherence to an ideology provides a strong sense of group identity and belonging. The psychological need to conform to group norms and maintain social cohesion within an ideological community can be a powerful driver of belief, sometimes overriding purely rational considerations. 3. The ethics and epistemology of ideology. This subfield grapples with profound philosophical questions raised by the existence of diverse and often conflicting ideologies. Truth claims and relativism. If all ideologies are socially determined, as Mannheim suggests, or discursively constructed, as post-structuralists argue, does that mean there is no objective truth? This raises significant epistemological challenges for political thought. The problem of ideological critique. If one attempts to critique an ideology, on what basis does that critique stand? Is the critique itself simply another ideology? This leads to debates about the possibility of a non-ideological or objective standpoint. Normative implications. How do we ethically evaluate different ideologies? What criteria should we use, e.g., human flourishing, justice, freedom, sustainability? This brings us back to foundational questions of political philosophy that ideologies attempt to answer. Venturing into these specialized academic subfields reveals that the study of political ideology is far from a simple categorization task. It is a deeply interdisciplinary endeavor, drawing on philosophy, sociology, psychology, linguistics, and history to understand one of the most powerful and pervasive forces shaping human societies. This level of analysis highlights the complexities and often hidden mechanisms through which ideas exert their profound influence. You're pushing into the truly advanced, often contested, and philosophical frontiers of political ideology. This is where the study moves from what an ideology is to how it constructs reality, why it holds sway, and the very limits of our ability to escape its influence. Let's dive into some of these more granular academic debates and highly specialized subfields. Political ideologies, granular academic debates, and advanced critiques. Part 14. Beyond the general theories of ideology by Marx, Gramsci, or Althusser, contemporary scholarship often engages in specific, nuanced debates that challenge fundamental assumptions and explore the micromechanisms of ideological operation. 1. The agency structure debate in ideology. This is a core sociological and political theory debate that deeply impacts the study of ideology. The question, to what extent are individuals, agents, free to choose, challenge, or create their own ideologies, versus being determined or constrained by existing social, economic, and cultural structures that produce and embed ideologies? Structuralist emphasis. Earlier theories, particularly orthodox Marxism and some forms of structuralism, lean towards structural determinism. Ideology was seen as an almost inescapable product of capitalist or power structures, shaping individual consciousness largely without their active input. Individuals were interpellated, hailed, into pre-existing subject positions by ideological state apparatuses, Althusser. Agency-oriented critiques. Critics argue this view diminishes human agency and the capacity for resistance, rebellion, and independent thought. How do revolutions or ideological shifts occur if individuals are simply products of structures? Reconciliatory approaches, e.g., Giddens' structuration theory, Bourdieu's habitus. Anthony Giddens' structuration theory argues for a duality of structure, where structure is both the medium and the outcome of social action. Structures enable and constrain agency, but agents, through their actions, also reproduce or transform these structures. Applied to ideology, this means individuals are shaped by ideologies, but also actively interpret, internalize, and even creatively modify them through their social practices. Pierre Bourdieu's habitus, a system of dispositions, ways of thinking, feeling, acting, acquired through social experience. Habitus mediates between objective social structures and subjective individual action. Ideologies become part of one's habitus, shaping perception and practice. But this habitus is also adaptable and can be transformed through new experiences and struggles. Granular debate. This debate manifests in studies asking, for example, how much a protest movement is a spontaneous expression of individual grievances, agency, versus a structured response to systemic oppression and pre-existing ideological narratives structure. It informs how scholars analyze ideological change. Is it driven by intellectual breakthroughs of agents or by shifts in underlying material conditions? 2. Post-foundationalism and the deconstruction of ideologies' coherence. Building on post-structuralist insights, post-foundationalist thought radically challenges the notion of ideologies as stable, coherent, and internally consistent systems. Critique of metaphysical foundations. Post-foundationalism questions the idea that ideologies rest on secure, universal foundations, e.g., inherent human rights, natural law, historical inevitability. It sees these foundations as discursively constructed and constantly open to contestation. Radical contingency. If there are no fixed foundations, then the very coherence of an ideology is seen as radically contingent, a temporary stabilization of meaning through discursive practices, rather than an inherent logical unity. Empty signifiers and hegemonic articulation. Laclau and Mouffe, key figures here, argue that ideologies function by articulating various, floating signifiers, concepts like freedom, justice, the people, that have no fixed meaning. Different ideological projects compete to hegemonize or fix these meanings, thereby constructing a particular social order. Ideological struggle is thus primarily a discursive struggle over the meaning of core concepts. Anti-essentialism. This approach rejects essentialist definitions of identities, e.g., woman, proletariat, that ideologies might rely on. Instead, identities are seen as effects of ideological interpellation and discursive construction, granular debate. Scholars using this approach analyze specific political discourses, speeches, policy documents, media narratives, to show how ideologies attempt to create coherence out of inherently unstable meanings, often by creating internal/external binaries. us versus them. They focus on the process of ideological formation rather than its static content. 3. Ideology and effect theory, the emotional dimension of belief. Moving beyond purely cognitive or discursive analyses, effect theory explores the role of non-conscious, precognitive emotional forces in the formation and persistence of ideological attachment, beyond rationality and false consciousness. Traditional views of ideology often imply a rational or irrationally distorted cognitive process. Effect theory, however, emphasizes that ideological adherence is deeply intertwined with feelings, emotions, and bodily responses that may operate beneath conscious awareness or logical reasoning. Effective investment. People are not just convinced by ideological arguments, they are invested in them effectively. Ideologies provide emotional security, a sense of belonging, and outlets for passions, e.g., hope, anger, solidarity, resentment. Sticky effects. Sarah Ahmed's concept of sticky effects describes how emotions can attach to certain ideas, objects, or figures, making them appealing or repellent without explicit rational justification. This explains why certain symbols or slogans can immediately evoke strong ideological responses. The circulation of effect. Effect theorists study how emotions, e.g., fear, enthusiasm, disgust, circulate within public discourse, and how political actors strategically deploy them to solidify or fragment ideological loyalties. Granular debate. This subfield leads to analyses of political rallies, media spectacles, and online phenomena, dissecting how visceral responses and collective moods are cultivated and channeled into ideological formations, often bypassing critical deliberation. It also investigates the role of trauma, anxiety, and desire in shaping political leanings. 4. Deliberative democracy and the challenge of ideological pluralism. In the realm of normative political theory, the concept of deliberative democracy directly confronts the reality of ideological pluralism. The ideal, deliberative democracy, championed by thinkers like Jürgen Habermas and John Rawls, in a different vein, posits that legitimate political decisions arise from public deliberation, where citizens offer reasons for their positions, listen to others, and are open to persuasion. The goal is to reach consensus or reasoned agreement through rational communication. The ideological challenge. The existence of deeply entrenched and often incommensurable ideologies poses a significant challenge to this ideal. If people's views are rooted in comprehensive worldviews that are not easily amenable to rational revision, how can genuine deliberation occur? Rawls's reasonable pluralism. Rawls acknowledged the persistence of diverse, reasonable, comprehensive doctrines, including ideologies and religions, in a free society. His solution was to seek an overlapping consensus on principles of justice that individuals from different comprehensive doctrines could agree upon for different reasons. Post-foundational critiques of deliberation. Scholars like Chantal Mouffe argue that the ideal of pure consensus through deliberation is a liberal fantasy that ignores the fundamental antagonistic nature of politics. Ideologies are not merely different viewpoints to be rationally reconciled, but competing ways of constituting the social world. True democracy, for Mouffe, involves managing inevitable ideological conflict, agonism, rather than eliminating it. Granular debate. Debates in this area focus on the design of deliberative forums, the role of facilitators, the possibility of ideological bridging, and the limits of rational argumentation when faced with deeply held, effectively charged ideological commitments. They ask whether deliberation can truly transform ideological stances or merely clarify them. These academic subfields demonstrate that the study of political ideology is a vibrant, evolving, and intellectually rigorous area. It moves beyond simple definitions to grapple with the profound ways in which ideas shape reality, individual experience, and the very fabric of political life.